And action. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick. Happy Thanksgiving. Mike had a question yesterday in clinic. Today's Thanksgiving, Thursday. Yesterday, Wednesday, Mike had a question about what to do because he's going to gain weight for Thanksgiving. And he was worried about what's going to happen when he comes back for the blood test or when to get the blood test. I told him, wait, just enjoy the holiday, but if this is the first time you're finding me, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below if you like my videos and the alert button to find out when I do new videos. So, Thanksgiving eating, or eating for Thanksgiving. Oh, this is a turkey. It's supposed to be a turkey because of Thanksgiving. But there's, I've put together an acronym to make it safe to have Thanksgiving Day dinner. So here's my acronym, EFPPHW. It's kind of long. I couldn't think of anything to link it to, but just to bear with me. We'll talk about each of these in succession. So I went to work. That's why I'm dressed like this. It's cold outside. It's about 30 degrees, but I started the day by exercising. I think if you exercise, especially because most people don't have to work on Thursday, on Thanksgiving, exercise when the gym is still open, when everybody else is asleep. It'll give you at least you'll pay it forward by burning some calories before you have that big Thanksgiving Day feast. So exercise will usually initiate an endorphin and an enkephalin reaction. Those are hormones that come about when you exercise. Those hormones stimulate parts of the brain that make you feel happy, make you feel satiated. That's why after exercise, a lot of people feel really good. But if you can do enough exercise, today I had more than usual. I usually exercise about 15 minutes at a time, but now I went to about 45. A good pump and feel good. And hopefully this will last for a couple hours. Now most parties, most festivities don't begin until early afternoon, but I have to set up some lights and do a couple other things. But if you exercise beforehand, you at least will burn some calories. You'll feel good about yourself. One thing will be you won't feel guilty afterward if you do ingest more than usual. Number two, you'll have that floating hormone that will still hopefully be around by the time you go to hold your plate and fill it up. So if you feel good and you're not starving and you're not angry, then your craving will be controlled and you won't overfill your plate. That's the concept. Three, it's nice to have a little sweat beforehand because the body, when you're exercising, doesn't necessarily look for food. It satiates you, so you stop the craving already. So those are that's what you can get with exercising that day. Just don't get hurt. The next is F, and with F I link to fasting. Fasting, I believe, when you, if you look at the biggest problem with most Americans being overweight, the biggest problem is overeating, too much volume, too many calories, too many timed feeds. So if you fast from the time you wake up until the time it's time to get ready for the party, at least you'll have a couple hours. I fast already. I usually don't eat anything from 9 o'clock at night till about 10 in the morning. So I do like 11, maybe 12 hour, a 12 to 14 hour fast. And I'm okay with that. But if you do it, if you don't fast, that's fine, but if you do it just for today, Thanksgiving, you again will have the opportunity to cut down your total volume, or you'll at least make it equal, because if you cut out eating one meal, that means you can, at the least, you can push that total volume to just Thanksgiving dinner instead of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Small amounts, you can just have it all at dinner time and not feel guilty again. And usually, if you think about what an average American eats, about 2,500 to 3,000 calories a day, not always good calories, so usually half of them are empty calories. If you just fast for the morning and afternoon and just have dinner and maybe a little alcohol, you still will keep that total calorie count down, and in the end, by Friday morning, you won't be feeling so guilty, you'll still be full. So fasting is important. I will do a video coming up on fasting for Tim, and I'll talk more about the concept of what happens to every cell in your body when you fast. Next is protein. Oh, sorry, next is pause. So when you do get to the party and you haven't eaten and you're exercising and your exercise high is kind of tapering off, right before when you get your plate in the Philippines, in a Filipino party, as soon as you walk through the door, you get a plate. But when you get your plate, if you just pause a second. In our household, when I was a kid, we used to always pray before eating. And I think as hungry as you were, you went downstairs. Mom always said, don't eat anything till dinner time. You went downstairs, oh, I'm starving. Okay, pray. So you wait, you pray, you pause, and it controls that feeding frenzy. If you've ever seen a dog, when you start ringing or hitting the bowl, the dog starts to salivate, starts to get really anxious. My dog, Perry, he starts to bark. He's already really fat. He might not even be famished, but the reaction is turned on, the Pavlovian response. So if you don't keep that in check, your plate will turn into 2 plates, 3 plates, because you initiated that feeding frenzy. And sometimes when you're fasting or when you're hungry or when you're stressed out, the body and the brain says, I want more, and it won't listen to Ghrelin and leptin, those signals of satiety, and you might overeat, which is not a fun thing. And I'll talk about how to pick up those cues later on in H. So pausing before you eat. Sometimes if you just separate from the party, if the party members don't pray or don't pause for a second or don't give thanks, maybe just step away a little bit like you're going outside and just be in nature for about 5 minutes, doing some deep breathing exercises, then go back in. You can make some excuse up like you have to get something in your car or your camera or something, but just sit there in nature, look around, and do some breathing exercises, 4-7-8 breathing or guided imagery. Walk in and you'll be able to manage your eating and your plates a little bit better. Pause. The next thing is protein. And Louis Arona had a really nice study. It was small, but he had a nice study on how to not initiate the insulin response. It's scientific, so you take the love out of food, but if you look at what happens when you eat food, your fuel, if you break it down into the 3 macronutrients, fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, Louis Arona actually found that if you do your proteins first, if you take in the proteins first in your plate, you won't initiate an insulin response, or at least as high an insulin response. And if you don't initiate an insulin response and you already start to get satiated or full, then you'll be able to turn off that hunting reflex, that eating reflex. So this is what happens. If you eat your proteins first, say you peruse the table, and you look at the dishes that have the highest proteins, and its basic building blocks, proteins would be beef, chicken, pork, fish, legumes, beans, tofu, seitan. So if you find the dishes that have the highest protein value, hopefully you'll understand what I'm talking about, and you put them on your plate, but you target them as being first, you eat them first, you'll actually start to get full because proteins cause a sense of fullness. Without stretching the stomach, the proteins cause a sense of fullness, and you'll already start to slow down, and you haven't even finished your plate. And then after the proteins, I would do fats. Fats also, healthy fats though. Fats also, so that doesn't mean you can have a cake. That's not a healthy fat. That's a lot of trans fats. I'm talking about avocado, walnuts, maybe fish that has protein and fat in it. So if you take advantage of your fats next, again, you'll have another macronutrient that gives you satiety, gives you a sense of fullness without stretching the stomach. And then finally, if you have your carbohydrate, now the carbohydrate, then you'll be hopefully done. The carbohydrate of the 3 macronutrients, carbohydrate initiates insulin. And at the highest amount, they all will do insulin secretion a little bit, but when your insulin spikes, and everybody thinks insulin's a bad thing, but it's not a bad thing. If you abuse it, it will be a bad thing. But insulin meets carbohydrates. So what happens is you have a high carbohydrate load, like all grains, or a cupcake, and the body and the bloodstream senses high carbohydrates. So the bloodstream says to the pancreas, make insulin, because these carbohydrates are irritating. The insulin and the carbohydrate come together and they come out of the bloodstream into the cell because it's irritating to the blood vessels. So they go into the cell, they get tucked away as fuel, and then the blood vessels and the bloodstream is empty of carbohydrate. And that's the way insulin works. But the problem is, if the bloodstream is empty of carbohydrate, one of the basic building blocks that the brain asks for as far as fuel, the brain will say, woo, I'm starving, I don't like that feeling. because everything was pushed away. So after a high carbohydrate load. So what the brain does, it says, I need fuel. It sends out feelers and messages and feelings to say you're famished, you're hungry, you're shaky, you're irritated, you're short-tempered, and it starts to make you look for high-value foods. And unfortunately, some people think high-value foods are chocolate or energy drinks or carbs. So it's a bad reflex. And if you want to control that reflex, you take low glycemic index carbohydrates. They're also called complex carbohydrates versus all the simple bad carbohydrates I just talked about. If you're getting confused already, again, you can control that whole carbohydrate thing by just doing the proteins and the fats first. So proteins as far as your meal first. And if you go old school, a lot of the older hosts, they don't like you picking at your food. They want you to have a full plate. They feel honored if you have a full plate. Just don't show them what you're doing. And they just see your fork moving and your plate is full, they'll be happy. But you can kind of divide it up, and proteins, fats, and then the carbs if you can. The next is H, and H it stands for Harahachibu. Harahachibu is a technique or saying in Okinawan of stopping when your stomach is 7 to 7/10 full, 7 to 8/10 full. It's essentially realizing the stretch feeling of your stomach. If you get overstretched for Thanksgiving, like most people do, you have to unbutton the pants because it's so, and unbuckle the belt because you're just so full and it's almost painful and you get sweaty. You got to sit down, which is really the bad thing. Harahachibu gets you, before you get to 10/10 full, you realize at 7 to 8/10 full, oop, it's getting there, and that's when you push back from the table. And again, that could be said, that thing with the pause I'm talking about, you can do that even afterward, but I wanted to have, I couldn't have 3 P's here, so I put Harahachibu. But if you pause as you're starting to get full, just take a break. It does take about 15 minutes for the stomach and the fat cells to get their signals of ghrelin and leptin to the brain. When the ghrelin and leptin, those 2 hormones, get to the brain will stop its hunting reflex, it'll stop its craving reflex. But it does take a little bit of time for that to happen. If you eat and gobble quick and you don't wait for that signal, you'll get to 10/10 full, and then the brain will not only get the signals from ghrelin and leptin from the stomach and fat, it'll also get stretch receptors from the stomach saying, this is painful. And then you'll feel guilty, and then you'll throw up, and that's not a great Thanksgiving. So that's, I think, why people sometimes get very sleepy afterward. I don't think it's because of the proteins in turkey. I think it's because we get over full, and you usually eat too many carbs. So watch out, please. And or there's alcohol involved. So Harahachibu. Last but not least, walk. And I'm going to try to do a video later, but in Chicago, it seems counterproductive to go inside a warm house, eat a warm meal, and then walk in 30 degrees afterward, but I'm going to do it later on for you guys. So walking. In Italy, they have an act where after dinner, you go outside, you walk around, you say hello to your neighbors, and you enjoy company. And I think there's great value in that. Passaviata or passeggiata. And if you do that, number one, again, you change that hormone wave that you just secreted from all that eating, and you walk. When you walk, it's said that when you're upright and you're walking around and you're balancing, it helps the digestive system work a little better. You're not going to run, you just want to walk. Number two, instead of having that heavy wave of insulin dumping, that usually is inevitable, but if you can control it, you will be okay. If you can get walking, it kind of sets off or neutralizes that heavy wave of fatigue and tiredness. And then you might be able to enjoy your company, not feel so full, know that you walk outside, and it'll give you a little bit of a break from eating. Now, if it's freezing outside or it's snowing, I guess you could walk inside the house, but having that activity of some sort, maybe a game play if you're with kids. But that would be the final letter in my acronym for what to do or how to take care of eating for Thanksgiving. So hopefully this gives you a little idea about what I do and what my patients do. But remember, if you are on your way to New Year's resolutions it's important to remember that New Year's is coming up January 1st, and you don't want to, this is my new calendar, I haven't opened it up yet, but I'm going to start marking it up. You don't want to wait till January 1st and come in the new year with an extra 5 pounds. It's going to be painful. Start doing it now without upsetting your host, without feeling guilty afterward, and you'll have a better holiday. So happy holiday to everybody. Otherwise, I appreciate you watching, and don't forget to leave some comments down below if you need to hear any videos from me. I'll see you in the clinic.